So as you guys probably know, I've done a ton of ranking videos in the past, and there's been one that I've been wanting to do for a while, though I just haven't been able to do it due to the fact that I hadn't beaten all the Souls games until recently, and that is ranking every final boss from all of the Souls games. So the only one that I haven't fought yet is actually the final boss of Sekiro, and I also haven't played Demon Souls Remake, but I feel like Demon Souls Remake, it's the exact same as the original Demon Souls, so I don't really feel like it matters that much. And plus, let's be honest with ourselves, Sekiro is not a Souls game. It's really hard for me to like rank or compare Sekiro to any of the other Souls games because again, it's not really a Souls game. It's honestly just an entirely different beast on its own. Anyway, I haven't really given this any prior thought before starting recording, but if I'm gonna be honest right off the top of the dome, I think Demon Souls deserves the worst final boss. Look, I know in terms of the lore and the story, you know, it was supposed to be a pitiful final boss. Normally, I would say that the boss was supposed to be a shell of its former self, but in this case, it's more like a little glob of goo compared to what he used to be. I don't know, it's just like this little sloth slimy thing that like flops all over the ground. I don't know, it doesn't even hurt you. I mean, it might hurt you, I'm not sure. When I fought it, I just went in there with my big Oonga Boonga sword and I took him down in a couple of hits, so I don't know if it actually has any moves. For me, the actual final boss, at least in my playthrough, was Old King Allant. But yeah, the King Allant that you find like right at the end of the game before the credits, yeah, no thank you. That's gonna stay at the bottom. I think next up out of all of these, I really gotta give it to Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin. I mean, the final bosses in these are technically the same. I mean, sure, if you do like certain things, you can get the one boss to spawn in and Scholar of the First Sin. I can't even remember what his name is. I fought him like one time, and even then in itself, it wasn't a very revolutionary fight. I mean, if we want to rank them separately, then like, yeah, sure, I would probably say that that boss was better. What was that? I can't even remember what the boss's name was. I gotta look this up. Aldia. Okay, yeah, that's what it was. Everybody was like, that's the real final boss of Scholar, man. You gotta get that one. I did a whole nother playthrough of the Scholar of the First Sin, and I honestly regretted it. That boss was so weak. Though if I was to choose between that or Nishandra, I would definitely choose that one because Nishandra doesn't even pose a threat. You just gotta circle around her, watch out for some of the dark magic she casts, but otherwise you just gotta spin in circles and slash at her. She spins around and follows you. It was definitely quite the letdown when I got to it. Ooh, which one deserves to go? You know what? Oh, man, you know what? I think I gotta give it to Elden Ring. It's just the final boss in this game, it really, no pun intended, tarnished the experience for me a bit. If the final boss in Elden Ring would have only been Radagon, I honestly think it would have had potential to possibly be number one for me. I mean, I don't know, it's really hard to beat my number one spot, but it probably would have honestly went number two. But the fact that you have to fight Radagon and then it takes you right into Elden Beast, and like, now that I know Elden Beast and I know Radagon, like, the fight isn't that bad, and in fact, in my most recent New Game Zero run, I beat them first try. But still, even despite that, now that I know the fight, now that I know how to take it on a bit more efficiently, it's just, I don't know, there's something about Elden Beast, it never really clicked with me. Maybe it's the fact that it runs away from you so much, like, in terms of spectacle, thematics, OST, like, quite literally everything about the fight screams S tier, but there's like certain mechanics in the fight, and the fact that you can't use Torn, and the fact that the Elden Beast runs away from you so much. Honestly, if the Elden Beast didn't run away from you so much, I don't think the fight would be that bad, and in fact, I think it still would have had potential to be in the second, like, number 2 spot for me. However, due to the fact that the fight drags on way longer than it should sometimes, just because the Elden Beast has the tendency to just run away, it's unfortunately gonna take the number 4 spot for me. But, I mean, I don't know, Radagon is really good. I might have to do a bit of a re-ranking. We'll see how it goes with these final few. So next up, I'm gonna put Dark Souls and Dark Souls Remastered. Again, the final bosses in these, I really don't think there's a difference. I mean, Dark Souls Remastered does come with the DLC, so maybe they're including Manus in that, but I'm not really sure. I'm just gonna say that both of these are talking about Gwyn. Gwyn is such an amazing fight. Like, you go on this long, treacherous journey, and then you get to kill into the first flame. You walk through this ash-shredded land, you know. Well, for me, I was sprinting through because I was trying to run away from all the Black Knights. But then normally, you know, when you get into a fog wall, you expect these big instruments, this big soundtrack, all these violins and strings going crazy, and the choir going crazy, but instead, you get into Gwyn's arena, and it's more tame, just the do. I don't even know how to, like, say the melody properly, but you know what I mean, like, it's more somber than anything. And if you don't know what you're doing, and you try to just, like, block and dodge your way through the fight, it can actually be quite challenging, but if you know what you're doing and you know the strategy is just like parrying him into oblivion, then the fight really isn't that bad. I know for me personally, every time that I do a playthrough of Dark Souls 1, I get into that boss fight and I'm basically taking him out in no more than maybe 5 or 6 hits tops because I like to use strength weapons. I also like to wear Havel's armor just so that I have extra protection just in case, but I go in there and as soon as he flies towards me, parry that one, get him down with the parry, and just parry him over and over, and next thing you know, like 5 or 6 hits later, he'll be down. Even if you're not using a strength weapon, probably even with like a dex weapon, you can get him down to like 6 or 7 parries tops. He's definitely not a lackluster final boss though. Again, the soundtrack is iconic, and if you don't know what you're doing with parrying, or if you're just bad at parrying in general, like, yeah, it could definitely be a little challenging, but once you get this parrying timings down, it's a lot more manageable. But yeah, I definitely think that Dark Souls deserves number 3. Next up at number 2, we have Bloodborne. Now, in my original series, Murgo's Wet Nurse was my final boss, but then I went back and I did another playthrough, just like a New Game 01, didn't do New Game Plus of Bloodborne to see if my opinion could change on the game a little bit, maybe see if I could start to enjoy it a bit more. And I'm happy to say that after playing through it again, I do enjoy the game a lot more than I did in my first playthrough. If you guys watched my original playthrough, I was, you know, by the time the game ended, I was like, I'm ready for this game to wrap up. It's an okay game, but it's really not for me. And while still, you know, the game, it doesn't rank among my favorites in the From Software catalog, it's still a really good game, and I do like it a lot more than I did before. And I did end up fighting Gehrman in that playthrough because, you know, when I did my original playthrough, I didn't know that refusing or submitting your life would result in, like, possibly fighting or not fighting the final boss of the game or whatever. Like, I didn't know that that was a thing. I know there's, like, another boss where if you eat all the umbilical cords, you know, the moon presence comes in or something like that. I haven't fought that boss yet. I don't know if people consider that to be the real final boss or if Gehrman's the final boss. I'm just considering Gehrman to be the final boss here. But for what it is, that fight was amazing. Like, up to that point, my favorite boss in the game was Gascoigne, but Gehrman. But now I can definitely say that Gehrman is actually my favorite boss in Bloodborne. It is so intense. It's very similar to the Gascoigne fight in the way that you have to be on your toes. You have to be like dodging, hitting, like knowing when to get those hits in, like being aggressively strategic. It's really hard to explain, but there's this flow to the fight. It's like this dance of death. I remember when I finally got him down, I was literally out of blood vials. Not to mention the arena itself is just, it almost gives me like Soul Cinder vibes, you know? It's like this vast open arena and it's just you two like fighting to the death and the score's going in the background, and it's just, it honestly is one of my favorite From Software fights, period, now. Oh, and don't even get me started on the fact that this guy literally has 3 phases. Next up, if you've been watching the channel for a while, it's pretty obvious what goes number 1 for me. This final boss is still my favorite boss fight in all of From Software's games, period. Soul of Cinder. By the time I beat this boss and by the time that the credits were rolling, I literally cried. I was truthfully sad that my Dark Souls journey was coming to an end. I had spent like that 2 or 3 months, however long it took, just, you know, making video after video of the Dark Souls games, going through Dark Souls 1 and then Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3. I cried at the end of Dark Souls 1 just because, you know, that I played that game at a point in my life where I needed to hear the message that the game was trying to tell me. By the time I beat Dark Souls 2, I was like, yay, thank God that's over. But by the time I got to the end of Dark Souls 3 and I realized I was at the end of the last Dark Souls game, and after reflecting on my journey up to that point and all the new people that I got to meet on this channel, just, you know, thanks to my Dark Souls series, it all kind of hit me in that moment. Like, while I was on my final attempt at Soul of Cinder, I knew that that was the final attempt. Like, I had been at it for 12 hours straight at that point. I learned everything that I needed to know. I literally switched my builds just for Soul of Cinder. I fought him with Fugs. And in that final attempt, as soon as I landed the final blow, I remember in that, I think that part even made it into the video where I was literally just sitting there like, oh, wow. Like, I was literally just at a loss for words. I know I haven't even talked about the boss yet. I've just been talking about, like, how the boss impacted me and all that. But I feel like what I'm saying is relevant because that's kind of what Soul of Cinder is, you know? It's like that moment of reflection for you to reflect on all the previous games, whether you started with Dark Souls 3, whether you started with Dark Souls 2, whether you're like me and you started with Dark Souls 1. That whole final fight is just one big, long reflection. Like, every part of that fight just screams, like, reflection and acceptance to me. Not only is it a moment for you to reflect on everything, but in another sense, the reflection also turns into you using the abilities that you've learned throughout the last 3 games. I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this. Like, throughout the fight, he's switching builds the entire time. In the blink of an eye, he can be a mage, or he can be using like a longsword, or a curved sword, or pyromancy. So in that moment, you have to decide, like, how am I going to defend myself? How am I going to dodge this? How am I going to block this? When are my openings? Should I heal now? Should I wait to heal? And obviously, if you played the last 3 games up to that point, then you know your openings, you know when you're free to do all of that stuff. So it's basically just taking everything that you've learned and applying it to this boss. Obviously, there's a little bit of a difference with his moveset. Like, he has a few delayed attacks. Some of them come really quickly. Some of them are like flurry combos. Like, for example, when he has the curved sword out, I never even attack him. I literally just run the entire time that he has his curved sword out because I know I basically have no openings, and if he gets his hands on me, I'm probably dead. But furthermore, it's kind of like that moment of reflection in another sense, where you just get to reflect on the last 3 games you've played. You get to reflect on the adventure you just had. And then obviously, once you knock out his first health bar, and then he brings out Gwyn's sword and the OST gets going, you know, you start having those callbacks to the first game, and it's just like, it's this whole flurry of emotions. I also always love that moment when you get his first health bar down, because, you know, the Soul Ascender is like this ultimate being. He has the strength to wield like any build at will, but as soon as you knock out his first health bar, you know, he goes down, the soundtrack gets started, he pulls out the sword, and it's just, it's always been so badass to me. It's like in that moment, he's just like, he's hitting you with everything that he's got. He's like, he's trying to get you down. I always love that moment in like movies, games, shows, whatever, where like the big bad gets to that point where he knows he's losing and he just like whips out his like his last ditch effort. He's gonna hit you with everything he's got. But then going back to what I was saying earlier, it's also like a moment of acceptance. In that moment, you're accepting that the adventures come to an end. You're accepting that the series for now is coming to an end. You're accepting not only the real life implications as to, you know, your feelings towards the game and accepting that the journey's over, but it's also just like, you know, a form of acceptance in the game itself. It's kind of this moment where you just have to accept, like, yeah, the world's dead. The world's screwed. We're battling over this fading flame. You just have to accept that it is what it is. And in that moment, not to sound like cringy, cliche, but at the end of the day, all you got is you, your soul, and that's keeping you alive, pushing you towards your goal. Do you know what your goal is? I mean, in terms of Dark Souls, not really. But it's also kind of beautiful in a way, because even though the world, like, dying in a sense, and, you know, the flames are fading, protagonist still has a soul. And even though all else seems lost, he's still fighting. And the best part is, the protagonist is you. No matter how dark or how hopeless things seem, there's always something worth fighting for. Well, that got a lot deeper than I thought it would. Anyway, this is my ranking of all the final bosses in all of the Souls games. Now, I'd love to hear from you guys. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What are your rankings? Whatever you're thinking, I'd love to hear from you guys. Anyway, as always, a shout out to the patrons and channel members: Karma's Fave, Grandma, Lubity Tab, Big Daddy, Matty, Chalupasaurus Rex, Razak, Polar, Ray, DeWebster, Lamas, Bianca's, Purgatory, Joe Pixant, Miller, Last King, Peter Magic, Mason, Irving, Teacher, Y15, Flim, 71, Aaron Reynolds, and Unknown. Thank you guys for watching. Have an amazing day. Stay beautiful. I love you all. And remember, don't go hollow. Peace.